good morning. Welcome back to Reaper Pro Tips with me, your host, and disembodied hands, Justin, who appears to have survived getting his last vaccination yesterday. Judging from the fact that he did type, so his hands at least are functional. And how are you all today? I have to adjust my setup here. I was a little bit wonky. The arrangement of my screen is wonky. It's Wednesday. Wonky Wednesday. I hereby proclaim it. There we go. Now I can see you all. It's one of those middle of the week kind of days. Yeah. Exactly. I don't get my last one for another 2.5 weeks. So, good. Everybody's doing good? Good. Hi, everybody. Boom. Wyvern. I'm going to drag out my colors. We're using some pretty fiery tones for Mr. Wyvern. Not going as brown as other people. Yeah, Dogfather, my mom said Wisconsin was kind of similar. They were expecting, they were good on Sunday, but expecting snow on Tuesday or something weird like that. I do remember one year in Wisconsin, I was working at Six Flags, at the Six Flags Park, and it snowed in May. The park shut down for one day because it snowed in May. So there has been freakish winter weather, or spring weather in Wisconsin. That was almost a summer snowstorm, which is just insane. That was, when I was 17, I want to say, 18. It appears to be just you, Kuroniko. 2 weeks. Very nice. Nice, Corey. Yes, unless you're in, Canada. Then my friends in Canada regularly get snow in May. And August. Oh, you have not caffeinated adequately this morning, Crowley. Let's see, where is my 90/70? The problem with 90/70 is I tend to put it with my browns, and I expect it where my reds are. So then I'm always looking for it with the reds. But it's not a red, it's a brown. It's just a very, 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 very red brown. Oh, yeah. That's funny, Bug Lips. Yeah, they happen, right? So 20-month resub, Iffy. You are almost challenging D. Clearman for that double subiversary thing. 4 more months and you'll get the double subiversary song. Jazzy with bones. I paint red on the plastic. You can see that I did. You can see the sheen of the plastic. What I do is I wash it first, though. If you're not gonna prime your bones, which I never do, I don't find it necessary. Then you should wash it first. So I just put it in a plastic bowl with a bit of just soap and really hot water out of my tap. And I sloosh it around, maybe for about 30 seconds, just actively slooshing it around in there with the suds and everything. And then I rinse it really well and I let it dry on a paper towel overnight. I don't do a toothbrush. I don't do any of that stuff. It's not necessary to scrub your bones. Just wash it. Good deal. Just checking out. But yeah, so none of the bones you see me paint on here are primed. Because I had too many experiences where you just couldn't trust the primer. Not with brush on. Brush on's usually fine because brush on primer is formulated a lot like regular paint. But spray primers, aerosols, I couldn't really trust it. I was too lazy to do the research. I was just like, meh. I just do it. I was one of the people testing bones back in the beginning that Ed had testing to make sure that you could just paint directly onto them. That was his goal. Because originally these were meant for paint and take stuff. So he wanted you to be able to break it out of the plastic and just paint it. And it was fine. Good morning, everybody. Well, yeah. I mean, Stynol Res is another example of a primer, which is Badger's, right? That you can airbrush on. Apparently you can brush it on, but I've heard mixed reviews of that. But it airbrushes very well, and it goes over bones, and it doesn't do the weird never dry thing. So, yeah. Agreed, Scrub Your Bones is a good album name. But what kind of band? I kind of feel like it should be a blues band. If it's Scrub Your Bones would be a fantastic blues album name. Right, exactly, Valendar. Yep, everybody does it differently. Some people like to do the underpaint, the underwash with the brown liner. I just don't. I tend to like white primer, though, or gray primer. So the bones color is actually really close to what I want. You can see a little bit of green on his butt where I greened in his hip joint because we had a gap there. Right. Is that just something you've heard, Valendar, or have you actually talked to a chemist about it? Just to like, just my own curiosity there. It makes sense, but at the same time, I don't think it's the only thing going on because I have seen brush-on primers react. Like, there is a different chemical structure to primer than there is to... There's a chemist who posted in the Facebook group. All right. So I would believe that's mostly it. I would think that there's probably other chemicals that could react because I have seen a slight stickiness emerge with some brush-on primers. So, but yeah, I could see that. I could see that mostly it's the aerosol chemicals. That makes sense. Alrighty. So what were our other colors? I wrote them down. Yes. And it's browner than you'd think. The Wyvern is browner than you'd think. We do have an orange brown. We have that. And we have, I think, fire or sunrise. What did I use? Fire. Using a lot more fire lately. Fire's a little bit muted. That's why I went with it. The ground is moving and you're covered in spots, if that means anything. Yeah, possibly Valendar. I mean, it makes sense, right? There's just like... The bottom line is, if most people say a primer is okay for priming bones, they've actually done it and do it, then you're probably fine. Listen to them if you want a primer. I just never really... If I don't need it, I just don't do it. So, but then again, I'm also not painting these to be gaming models. I'm painting these, to mostly be display models. So, if I send them to Ron, they're just going to sit in the gallery. So they're not going to get regularly handled. So the other thing, if I mail these out, then I would, like if I was sending them to somebody to actually use, I would be putting a sealer on top rather than a primer underneath. So. Morning, Joe. Yeah, the liners also have a different chemical format. Like their base is fundamentally different than other MSP paints. So Rhonda asked me about that actually a while back because she was skeptical that liners would make such a big difference. But I'm like, no, these are very different. So they could make a difference. I can't tell you why, but they certainly are more translucent. They're probably higher acrylic. That may cause them to stick better. No idea. But yeah, the washing them and doing a wash of liner to give kind of an initial coat so that you can do other things is not a bad idea. And lots of people get success with that because it brings the details out. I prefer not to like underpaint the whole model. I prefer to kind of like, tailor it as I go. So for me, and I've got our picture. I just want to check on his wings. Let me go back and find my glorious picture. There's my glorious picture. So this is our Wyvern. It's more of a dragon. Like it's, they call it a dragon or a Wyvern. But this is what we're going to do. So right away, I'm probably going to darken my back scales. That I did this proof of concept just to see if I could get the colors the way I wanted them. And I do like the colors. We're not going as bright as this, obviously. I'm not using a tremendously bright orange, and we're not using any of this bright red that you see in the stripes at all. Wyverns are traditionally a little more dull, but I wanted a little more vibrant of a Wyvern. We're using fire orange instead of sunrise, which is just a little more muted out, and we're using an orange brown, which is more dull than the oranges that they are using on here. However, our mahogany brown is very similar, and I may shade it, I believe I shaded it with some Kraken ink, and got close to this. We're just not using as saturated of colors when it comes down to it. The color here on the wing, up or on the wing, is actually pretty indicative of what you'd get with orange, brown, and mahogany. So I am basing it on this, and we're basing the pattern on this. Yeah, John. We're not doing as bright as this, but we're basing the pattern colors on it. So I'm going to want to do the dark. I want to do the dark limbs. I want to do the dark top of the head and the light underside of the head. Ooh, my light is definitely reflecting off my phone here. Boop, there. Much better. So yeah, so this is the picture that I just pretty much Googled, you know, Wyvern, monster, Dungeons and Dragons, and then just went to image search, and that's what you want. You just want to find something that looks interesting. There were a couple other interesting ones, but that one I think was the one I liked the best, so we're just going to do it. So all of the back side and the top side of the limbs and the wings are going to be made with those colors, and then the underbelly, we're going to go with that in kind of neutral bone color. Last time I matched wolf gray Osirian sand and bleached linen to the colors I saw on the underside of the wyvern, so those are the colors we're going to use for that. But today I think we're just going to block in everything. Like everything gets blocked in today, except for probably the underbelly. And I did say I might go with more of a blue-black for the top of the head and down the back, just because it's complementary to the orange tones. Although I am using Kraken ink, which is a dark purple, to shade the red-orange. So I guess I'm going to go Nightmare, maybe. Nightmare might be a little bit too blue. We'll see. But I don't mind a bit of blue, so we'll see. We're gonna leave Nightmare mostly the black. This is one of those times where I'm not going to add in a lot. When I do add in white, it's going to be for spot highlights. We're not going to go really heavy with it. So, morning, Inara. A lot of beasts have light-colored bellies and darker colored tops. This creates an issue for me when trying to shade the underside and highlight the top. Any tips for dealing with this problem? Rex, I mean, the basic is, depending on the pose of the monster, right? Like this monster, he's getting some light on his underside, right? But you can see the shadow color here. And the answer is you just don't bring up the highlights on the underbelly as much. Maybe you only bring him up on the side. Like if he was crouched on all fours, you probably wouldn't see much of this really light color, except for like up on the neck. So I tend to keep it a little bit darker, except for on the neck and chest on dragons, where you do tend to see the underbelly. But I mean, the top, you need to figure out what your specific color is and highlight it accordingly, right? If your top is dark, like we're going to be doing this time, you don't highlight it as much because it's a dark color. It needs to stay that way. So you always need to like be asking yourself, you know, how much light is the surface getting? Like, is it going to stay dark? It's still going to read a little bit lighter. If you go in with this gray beige and paint the underside, especially when you've got these darker colors coming into it, it's going to be very evident that this is a lighter color. You're just not going to highlight it up as much because it's like buried on the underside of the creature if it's on all fours. This one, like I said, is getting more light because, you know, he's more reared up in the air. But I mean, highlighting, you gotta just kind of look at the color and treat it as the color. And also you need to figure out like the surface, like is it a shiny surface, in which case your highlights are small and sharp, like he's obviously done here. He's left a lot of the black just kind of almost featureless and only brought up tiny bits of highlights. That's indicating to you that this is probably a more glossy surface, although he hasn't gone up to white. He didn't want to pop highlights apparently. He's just giving us some sky color there. If it had been a more matte surface, you would see more. Yeah, I mean, it's like wolf gray may be a dark color, the shadow color for the underside of this model, but it is still lighter than the orange, right? So the shadow color of the underside is lighter than the mid-tone to highlight color of the top of the dragon. So it's all relative. I mean, we're going to be doing it on this, so... Because this dragon is definitely crouched over. I mean, the only place you're going to see that real light on the underside of the body is where we go up into the jaw and the neck here. Like, it really, you don't see it anywhere else here, except maybe a little bit on the back here, back of the legs, because that's going to catch some light back here. But just on, like, the back of the haunch, probably. And I may even just decide to make all the legs all the same color. Like, it's... No, I wouldn't make the tip of the tail light. I'd make it black. You want it menacing. White-tipped tails are a friendly thing to us. You know why? Dogs. Dogs and cats. So a white-tipped tail is like, weirdly, not a evil thing. Like, you know, like if I want this monster to be menacing, I don't want to give him a white-tipped tail. But you could possibly, I mean, it's all, okay, animals make sense, first of all, right? For the most part. If you see a lizard and it's got a light underbelly, for the most part, you don't see that splotching. You don't see splotching of that lighter color over the rest of the lizard, right? It makes sense. So when the lizard's tail is out, even if the bottom of the tail is still pale, the tippy top of that little, you know, narrowing down tail is still that darker color. So we don't want to arbitrarily necessarily mix that up unless you're trying to, you know, do something like a party-colored wyvern, which you could do, I guess. It would look a little weird. Nobody would quite know what you were doing. But, it's not... Okay, so the other colors. Is it thinner than clear brights? It'll be similar. It won't cover as well as Ritterlich Kuruniko, for example, but it will cover better than clear blue. So when you ask me just a generalized question like that, it covers better than some colors, and it doesn't cover better than others. I think it probably covers better or equally to Void Blue. They're very similar, except that Nightmare has a lot more black in it. So, yeah. That's cool, Goobs. But yeah, Kuruniko, it's not, I mean, Nightmare is not a super high coverage color because of the base that it's built in. But it's not like a super weak sauce color either. So is it really fluid? Yeah, if I shake mine, it's pretty fluid. It's not super thick. It's not built in a super thick base. It's got a lot of pigment loaded into it. The more pigment you load into a paint, the more watery actually it gets in consistency. Because the things that make your paint thicker are additives and resin types. And so the more pigment you add in, the higher percentage of pigment to paint you have, the more you compromise that. Which is a big, like, you know, not what people tell you who don't know anything. It seems like if there's more pigment, it should cover better, but that's not always the case. I've done a PDF on this. But I mean, do you get what I mean, Rex? Where when you're picking your underside colors and you're picking your top colors, your shadow of your underside, if it's meant to be really pale, should still be lighter than your highlight of your top side. Or at least your first highlight of your top side. Like if I go up to my orange here, now they're very similar. These two colors, if I put them next to a grayscale, that would be the way to look at it. Although I think they're very similar. So the shadow of, in this case, the shadow of my underside is equal to the highlight of my top side. More or less. Way thinner than your Void Blue? I don't know. Maybe it got compromised, Kuruniko. They're built, the Void Blue and the Nightmare are built in the same sort of base, so there's no reason for Nightmare to be thinner unless it's the amount of pigment. But it also, like, it shouldn't be, like, crazy. How old is the bottle, I guess? I don't know. I can't do anything for you there. Because if it froze, it shouldn't be watery. So I'm not certain why it would be thinner. Keep in mind, though, the longer that I'm away from the company, if Ed asks Sadie to tweak some formulas, I won't know about it. So, let's see here. I want my Nightmare. So when I put Nightmare into my palette, it does proper drops. It's not super runny, but it's not super thick either. And if I just paint my Nightmare on a piece of paper, or on the side of my palette, with a soft brush, it's full strength here, and it's pretty full strength. Like, I'm getting a lot of glare. Pardon me while I adjust my lamp. Like, I still need my light, but for some reason, today, I must be slightly in a different position, because I'm getting a lot of glare. There we go. But as you can see, it's still pretty solid. It's like it doesn't... If I really pull it, I can see some of the palette through it, but that I have to, like, really press it and pull it. Oh, then maybe it got frozen. If it's weird and separating, that says frozen. That's the most likely outcome. Which is probably why it seems watery to you, because it's probably got a thick goo at the bottom of the bottle. Because things separated out. And when you do shake it, it comes back briefly, but then it'll separate immediately. That's true, Nemezik, but different bases can also act slightly differently. Yeah, I mean, it's warmer weather now. I mean, you could go and just complain to Reaper. They'd probably send you a new one. We do that. If the paint is weird or bad, we'll usually ask you for the batch number. Although maybe not. I'm not sure if they do that, if that's common anymore. Unless we see a consistent problem with the batch. I don't know that we do that. Yeah, the metallics are very sensitive to it, Cookie. That won't fix it, Jelly. If you really have a frozen paint, it will not fix the problem. It will seem to fix the problem because it will agitate the paint better than, just shaking it. So it'll essentially put it into solution a little bit better. But to really put it back in solution after freezing, you would need to re-put it into the original, centrifuge. And I don't know if even that would work because technically it's got a bunch of additives now. Yeah, frozen. Most likely. Because you can get a frozen paint to look okay, but the minute you put it in your palette, it starts to separate super fast. And it'll clump up after very little time. And it really will not perform the way that you expect. Nope, Cookie, what happens is very simple. It's a water-based paint, and when it freezes, the water freezes out of the paint into crystals, and it shoves the solids, which is all the rest of the stuff, pigment and the base, the resins, those are all solid. They're not gonna, they're gonna freeze, but they're gonna freeze as particles. So the water, though, it's gonna crystallize and freeze, and as it freezes, it's just gonna shove all that resin and pigment into a ball. And then that's gonna freeze within the leftover water and medium. And so it essentially forces all of the particulate matter that's in solution in the paint out of solution. And it won't go back. They use big chemical centrifuges to originally put paint into an emulsion. They have to convince these plastic particles and these pigments that water is their friend. Just like trying to do an emulsion with mayonnaise or with, oil and lemon juice, except that that's a lot easier. Correct. Out of solution to the point they cannot go back. That's why house paint always has, any paint that has this sort of build is going to tell you, do not freeze. I'm not certain that tube paint is the same. If they use something like a gum arabic or something, then it's a paste. It's still a water-based paint, but I'm not sure how much actual water is in that. And if it's built in a gum, then it might be able to freeze and come back from it. I'm not certain. I haven't experimented with tube paint like that. But they usually have it as a gum-based, thinnable with water. Not hydrophobic. The other one. Hydrophilic? I think hydrophilic. But I'm not certain that tube paint is affected the same way. Yes, if part of the paints look like cheesecake, it's a good sign. But with MSP, it's a very bad sign. Okay, so I'm looking for a different... Friendly to water. Friendly to water is what I want. Water compatible. Maybe it's just water soluble, but there got to be a technical term for it. All right, because we love our technical terms. I want a big brush today. Big brush, big brush. You know what? Maybe we'll use our big flat. Big brush. Big, gigantic, horrible brush. Or I'll use my mixing brush. Mixing brush could be good too. Oil paints? Okay, so oil paints are a bit different, right? Because they can't freeze. And the oils are typically easy to stir back in. But do be aware that if you have really old oil paints, Rex, they're probably made with original artist pigments and not the current, like, nowadays, artist paints are more and more being made with the kind of stuff that I use, which is to say not cadmiums, not cobalt, not original ultramarine. So yeah, I know hydrophobic repels water, but so that to me says that it is hydrophilic is what I'm looking for. Friendly to water. But anyway, so you could be running into, oil paints do tend to get a little gritty and grainy over time, I find, although it depends on how you've stored them. But I think overall oil paints stay better for far longer than acrylics. And I would be more inclined to think that the brand has changed its formulations over the years extremely, and that the pigments are different, and that also they probably improved some things. So that's more like what you might be seeing. Oil paints have changed a lot. It is, but I mean, we usually ship. I think the way to do that would be to just ship it over to Kit in the UK and then send it out to you. I don't know, unless it's coming from the USA. If it's coming from the USA, then yeah, then we're just dealing with it. All right, let's get some wet blending done here because we are distracted. The labels are, well, yeah, almost certainly, Rex, they'd change the label over time. Very few, all these companies like to rebrand as a bit more modern. They like to redo their labels and refresh things. Heck, even your like canned vegetable people like to do that, right? These days, like they'll like kind of change their branding a little bit or their packaging so that people look at them again. So the branding wouldn't be an indicator, but if those paints are like 50, 60 years old, chances are they were still using, I mean, they certainly would still be using cadmiums and the real pigments like actual burnt umber. Nowadays, a lot of companies have gone to non-toxic, much cheaper ways to make the color without using those original expensive pigments they're based on. So that means when you change up that pigment, which is the majority of what a tube paint is all about, you're going to get a big difference. Like, you may see granulation or a lack of granulation or, you know, who knows. But, I mean, I have some oil paints that I got, oh boy, I want to say I got them in the mid-90s. So they're 25 years old. They're fine. Like, they're just peachy. So I don't think they separate out, like, and especially not a tube paint. Like, part of the thing with these fluid acrylics, as I'm going to call them, because that seems to be what everybody in the art world is calling them, is that they do have a very fluid consistency, much more fluid, much less paste-like, and that means that things fall out of solution easier. Yeah, I have actually, Bexa. It doesn't work real well. The reason that it doesn't work real well is that watercolors, many colors are staining. So like you would maybe reach for like a violet, and if you make any mistake at all, it'll have stained into the primer, and you almost can't blend it up from that because it's staining. So essentially any watermark that you put down stays. And the problem with watercolors on traditional miniatures is that unlike with paper, where you can pre-wet the surface to make a perfect blend to eliminate that watermark problem, you have a lot harder time doing it on a primer. You cannot pre-wet the primer really, not really effectively. Maybe there's somebody out there who can learn to do it, but I found it to be more trouble than it was worth. I think that the other thing to remember is watercolors never fix. Like, they have both of those problems. They stain and leave watermarks, and they never fix. You have to seal them. So, like, if you painted a miniature with watercolors and then you accidentally sprayed some water on it when you were watering your plants, it would reactivate and blur. So, I mean, it's a cool, like, thing to play with, but you'll find those limitations. Yeah, you know, you'd have to, like, Except now then there's our chemicals, right, Aspire? But I mean, yeah, I thought about that. I was trying to think about ways to get around that. But there's really no reason to. Like, if you want vibrant color, you could go oils or like high quality, like you wouldn't want to go gouache. But I mean, oil paint gives you that vibrancy and depth that watercolor has, and you can use oils on miniatures. So at that point, there's really no reason to do watercolor. Like, I don't know. All these things are good at some things and not good at other things. Like, instead of just doing it because, you know, you want to do it, although you certainly can do that. If you want to play, go play. I did. That's why I know this. But ask yourself what you're trying to accomplish. If you're reaching for watercolors because you like their vibrancy, consider underpainting with acrylics and then doing some oils to get that vibrant color instead. And play with that. It's not separated. Stirring it doesn't fix it. Like, it doesn't go into the oil solution, Rex? Is that what you were saying? I'm not getting exactly what the problem is. But is it just tiny little granules? Like, are you seeing like little tiny specks, or what are you seeing? Like, I'm not getting exactly what the problem is. Tell me more. We want to know more. Give us the informations. So I'm going to do all of the scales in the mahogany brown. And if I'm going to wet blend, I do want a solid coat on this. I may want to just put down a coat of the mahogany and then wet blend. But when you have really well-covering colors, then you can wet blend with your first coat if you want to. Though you may get, as you go up, you may find that you get more mileage if you wait till it dries and then start a new blend. So you can do a little bit of wet blend there, like I did. Yeah, I mean, it's just like when you're an artist, when you're a 2D artist and you're thinking about starting a piece, what you're thinking about is what medium is going to convey this piece, this idea, or this technique I want to do the best, right, Bexa? So when you're thinking about trying something like, you know, watercolor, gouache, whatever, ask yourself, what are the liabilities and advantages of this medium? For watercolor, the one liability is staining. Another is that it reactivates when you add water. For opaque watercolor, gouache, which is actually the closest medium to our hobby paints currently, well, until they put out these new fluid acrylics, it was. The gouache doesn't stain as heavily because it's meant to be opaque, but it has the same reactivation problem. It doesn't cure. So again, you add any fluid to it, you accidentally splash it as you're rinsing your brush, and things are going to come up. So not durability, also very, very not good, you know, not great. It's not meant to be durable. It's meant to be put on paper. So all these ideas are interesting, but in general, if it's the vibrancy of the watercolor that you like, considering doing underpainting in dark and pure white on a miniature and trying some translucent oils, and you'll get similar effects. Now, the oils, the downside is shininess. And the doing fine detail is extremely difficult. And you can't really go over them with acrylics. You might be able to seal and go over them with acrylics again. I always thought that whole, you can't put acrylics over oils thing, I was like, well, really? You can't seal them and put a coat over that would enable you to do that? Like, I always wondered about that. I was always a little bit skeptical, but I never had time to test it. Yeah, much more reflective, absolutely, Rex, because in the old times, like, you wanted that. You wanted the gloss. Like, they did not... Matte finishes are a new thing to the art community. And so over time, the surface has maybe gotten duller, a little bit duller, but it's still much shinier than what we're used to. So the shininess wouldn't be indicative of a problem. So essentially, you're seeing brushstrokes. What that says to me is that the medium is maybe thicker. Have you added a little bit of extra medium and see if that, like linseed oil or whatever oil you're using, have you thought about, if you do that, does it help? Because over time, I think they do become just a little bit thicker. There. So we're doing this. If you wait like 4 days for the oils to fully dry. Oh, okay. Well, right. They'll bead. Yeah. See, and there we go. Rex has just put the lie to all those historical people telling me I couldn't paint acrylics over oils. But I bet you can't use thinned acrylics over oils. Like, it would still have a residue, I would think. And they probably wouldn't stick very well. I bet over time they'd also be prone to flaking off. So we're doing a little bit of wet blending here, guys. You can see how I can get that on the scales. It's a fast, easy way to get some blending. Okay, so good. Yeah, I mean, James knows, right? Wapple knows. He does so much oil painting on miniatures. He is our resident oil painting genius. Our resident Bob Ross. Except instead of the afro, he goes for the beard. But, I'm just going to do a little bit more wet blending here, just because I can. And this is where when I mentioned, as you want to go up with higher highlights, you may need to back out and start layering, or you may need to do a new wet blend. Because if you try to like add another layer of wet blending on top of your existing wet blend, you're kind of fighting. So usually wet blending, if you're going to use it to set up an area like this, you're going to do one pass and then let it dry and go to layering. And yeah, I don't know about the quality of the oils. Not sure of the brand jelly. James is just a very, had decades in the canvas painting field. James was a professional, 2D painter who swapped to miniatures because he saw the potential. And he had I think he lost everything. There was a fire or something, and so he's just like, I got to reboot. And then he looked and he saw miniatures, and he's like, huh. But, I mean, James was a master 2D painter before he was... There we go. So now we got our blend back. I had to redo it because... And this is with wet blending. If you go and you screw it up, you're going to have to redo it. You're going to have to redo the whole thing. Yeah. Minis have held up fine and all right. Yeah, well, then that's an urban legend. Thanks for debunking that, guys. They're everywhere. These people will tell you with the straightest face and with all seriousness, they believe it firmly, X, Y, or Z. And then years down the road, you will find out that these people did not know what they were talking about and that they were just parroting what somebody else had told them. They probably hadn't even tried it themselves. Or if they had, maybe they hadn't tried it quite in the right way. So always put your critical thinking cap on and don't be afraid to test anything, even and especially the stuff I tell you. Do it yourself. Test it yourself. Apply critical thinking hat. Because sometimes you're going to discover, maybe in general, the rumor is right, but you discover a new way to deal with it, right? So there's always new ground to be broken. Oh, that's a bummer, Cornico. Oh, the Reapercon Darth Abacus spot. Right, exactly. Well, because people are impatient, right? Especially miniature painters. Yeah, exactly. There you go. Homemade centrifuge. You go for it, Aspire. You try it. I'm curious as to whether it would work or if the other solids added... Because the thing is, you put the base in solution without most of the solids, without the solids being added. Like the other solids, like pigments and stuff. So I'm curious as to whether you could even use a centrifuge after you have added pigment and other additives to the paint, because it would affect the way, it would affect the mix, right? So I'm curious whether you could even make that work or if it would be fraught with peril. Well, airbrush does, in general, I find, get better coverage out of much less paint, Mathophile. But for terrain, I mean, a lot of people say just use apple barrel, and I'm for that. That way you can get a big bottle of the color that you need. Because for me, it's like I would go through so much stormy gray and like shield brown and muddy brown and stuff like that. If I just tried to use, and I have done this, used Reaper paint for terrain. But you could do it either. I think that I think that Reaper does stretch farther with an airbrush, but I think there's no shame in going with the cheaper option for large pieces, or if you're painting a big thing. Do remember that it usually doesn't have as good adhesion, the other paints, because of the base. But other than that, you can always seal it. So I'm going to base coat these guys carefully. I want to go lighter with the wing membranes. I want to go darker with the scales and the body, more reddish. And then when we get out to these wing membranes, I'm going to start bringing it up much more orange. Yeah, good point, Jelly. So yeah, if you're bad at oil paint, was a cheaper brand to begin with, then you could be having problems because of that. That's a good point. Thanks. Yeah, it's been so long since I worked with oils. This really has been like, I did a little futzing around with them when Wapple started using them just to play. And then I realized that I just didn't have the time to devote to it, so I stopped. I think you probably could get some very interesting effects melding the two. Mixed media miniatures. Triple M. Somebody needs to create that IP. Mixed media miniatures. Like, bill yourself as a, I use all these traditional art things on miniatures, and here's how you deal with them. That would be a good brand. Triple M. So we're going to just block in. So this is the other way to wet blend, is set it up first with a solid base coat of whatever your main color is going to be. And then once that's dry, you can wet blend over the top, but have that nice base down already. Kind of reminds you not to go outside of the lines. And for the shadows, for the purple shadows, I'm coming back in with layering. This color, this red color here, is a beautiful color called mahogany brown. It is a very, very red brown, as you can see. I almost call it mahogany red sometimes. It's kind of like nightmare black that way, where a nightmare black is very blue. But this is the equivalent color of a pro paint color called aged red brick that I loved. So when I first did it, I tried to make it in our red base and just use the aged red brick formula, and that didn't work because our red base was different from the old pro paint red base, and it did not work. So then I had to take a step back and go, all right, well, now I just need to reconstruct this color. And so in the second iteration, because we did the first 54 colors, and then the next set, I figured out how to mix the color equivalent to aged red brick. Now I am going to put a line of very dark scales down the top here. So I need to remember that one too. It's not necessary, Jazzy. I mean, I mixed everything up because if I felt like wet blending, I wanted to be able to just grab these colors. So I've like got my blue black, and I've got my orange brown, which is what I was using here. I haven't done anything with my fire orange yet. I like to have it all out because if I get like if I want to try something, then I've got the paint ready. Yeah, that's what I mentioned earlier, Jelly, is that you can get that crack, the paint can crack and fall off, right? Especially if the model is flexible, like a Bones. Because the acrylic doesn't have the tooth to bite into, because it's going over oil surface, which naturally is not friendly to it. So I'll block in some of this, and we'll go in and you'll do some more wet blending over here on the arm. I'll switch to a smaller brush for that wet blending, though. Usually when you're doing these bigger surfaces, use a brush as big as you can get away with for your base coating and for like wet blending the surface. But when you're switching to smaller surfaces, do switch to a smaller brush for your wet blend. But otherwise, you want to be able to cover everything very fast because you're working the paint while it's wet. And since you're not working with oils, but with acrylics, you don't have a lot of time to do that. So a bigger brush lets you progress faster over the surface. We started this model last week. We figured out our color scheme. So anybody looking at the first Wyvern episode will get a lot of talk about colors. So we're going to block out these guys, just this part of the model, I think, and down to the tailbone here. And then I think I'm going to work in the black scales because I don't want to forget them. It's very natural to highlight up to that top crest there like I did, and that was just a proof of concept, so that's fine. But this top row of scales does need to be black, so I am going to put that down as a reminder to myself not to get carried away in enjoying my web blending. The wings are going to be much more orange. I'll probably still use this mahogany brown in the deep creases here. And we are going to put patterns on the wings. No, I never prime bones. I just wash them. You can do whatever you want. As long as the primer works well on bones, just do it. I'm just lazy. I mean, efficient. And if I don't have to do it, I don't do it. Plus, it doesn't, in my experience, it doesn't need it. But, you know, this is back to the old debate. But the bottom line is, if you prime bones successfully, and they don't react badly with the primer that you use, and you enjoy doing it that way, do it that way. It's all good. I'm never going to look down my nose at you and say, oh, you prime bones. No, I'm not going to, like, pull that crap. I get disgusted enough at it when I see it in our community. It's like, to everybody their own, and as long as you can paint over it and it doesn't have a bad reaction, go for it. I never got the polarization between the white and black primer people either. Like, personally, black primer I have a very hard time with because I have a hard time seeing details on it. But, like, it's like people get, like, almost religious about their primers and not primers and color of primer and the cult of primer, and it's crazy. It's like, use what works for you. Black doesn't work for me very well. I'll use it these days sometimes on a bust or if I'm doing zenith. But like, it's still hard for me to see detail on it. If you're getting the results, John David, just keep doing what you're doing. Get his little paws here. Technically, I could paint all the way out to the claws, I guess, because I am going to do them black. So it's just habit where I stop before I hit the claws because I want to make them usually a contrasting color. But since I'm making his paws black, and I think his claws might be black too, I'll have to look at my reference photo. But it doesn't really matter then if I just paint over the whole thing and putting a solid base coat down never hurts as long as you remember to paint. Like, if you have trouble remembering to paint details, like you go back and go, oh my gosh, how could I have forgotten to paint the claws? Then do leave the claws like bare like I did, because it's a reminder that you still need to paint them. But if you don't have a problem with that, then just go for it. Yeah, that's odd, Big Apple, but you know, everybody. Yeah, the only right answer to the priming question is do what works for you. And don't let other people bully you into, like, you know, doing it their way. Like, if you want to try to do it a different way, by all means do it. It might teach you something. Painting over black primer is a very different experience for them painting over gray or white. So, and you generally have to use slightly different techniques to get success with it. So it can be very instructive. And likewise, that's why I started painting some stuff in Zenith. Because I realized that doing experiments with Zenith was going to make me more conscious of my lights and darks, which is something I felt as an artist I needed to work on. So then I started seeing the purpose of and enjoying to work with Zenith a little bit more, right? So don't be afraid to experiment here and there, but if you really don't know if you're going to like it, then just do it on a throwaway model that you don't really care about. Get a cheap pack of plastic skeletons or orcs or whatever and just go for it. take your friend up on, you know, his offer of 3 boxes of like Dark Eldar he never put together, you know, whatever. Just use those as your test models. Yeah, pretty much, Bug Lips. You got it. Yeah, exactly, Lord Nobody. Well, that's why Zenith is very useful, right? Is if you don't know highlighting, then learning to work with your Zenith Prime, and to make your Zenith Prime a little better. I mean, I've doctored the Zenith Prime to make it look better. So the first step is just using Zenith priming to get yourself to think about lighting. The next step is to try to work your Zenith priming so that it looks even better, right? So that it actually starts to look more like light in a way that you want it to, because it's not perfect. It's a good place to start, but it's not perfect. Well, you know, there are 2 schools of thought on that, Big Apple. So that's valid because, you know, you will cover up your Zenith priming very quickly once you start applying paint, right? So if you're not comfortable with painting thin, then you might think that. However, there's another way to use Zenith priming. And that is that you use it as a paint by number. So, yeah, it's stretch time, Kroniko. I'll explain this and then we'll go into that. So, essentially, figuring out, like, if I was using this triad, this orange and red triad on the Zenith, I would know that wherever it looks just gray, I should paint my orange brown, and then where it's black, I should paint my mahogany brown, and where it's white, I should paint my orange. And honestly, if you just used this to block in those solid colors, yes, it would cover your Zenith, but it would still give you an understanding of where to put your highlights, shadows, and midtones. So you don't have to be a thin painter to try Zenith if you do it that way. Or the other thing that people do that's very, very useful, and again, this depends on how you learn, right? But the other thing people do is they take a picture of it after they Zenith it. And then they take a picture from each of 4 angles so that they can see where their highlights go. And then they just paint it normally. So that way the priming still helps and helps them know where to put the highlights. But it's not just, you're not just utilizing that. Yeah, that's why I say primer's not it's not a perfect substitute for light, right, Bryce? Because it's going to diffuse, right? It sprays, but then it diffuses. And it's also not straightly linear. It sprays out. And so, you know, sometimes it'll catch things and you get surprised, and sometimes that would be a place light would hit, and sometimes it wouldn't, and trying to figure out. And then, of course, there's the, I'm going to get up and stretch break, guys, but we'll keep talking about this because it's interesting. So, and then there's the tuning, right? Because, like, if you're going to do a directed light, you know, that means maybe the other side of the model is all dark, and maybe that just looks really lackluster, and you don't want that. So then there's always the adding additional highlights, where maybe normally light wouldn't fall, but you still want to bring out the details, so you choose to go for artistic license. Yeah, no problem, Splat. I mean, it's all valid. So, like, I'll show you guys an example in a sec. Do your stretches. My back is like, I need these stretches today. Oh, sorry, did I miss something, Kroniko? Yeah, there are many different ways to use Zenith. We'll do the wing wet blending too, I think, this show, because it'll be fun. At least the top of the wings. All right, so one example of what I was just talking about is her stomach. She has some nice detail here on her belly, and technically only a little bit of it caught primer, but I wanted to bring out that texture, and so I chose to add little touches of the gray intermediate color to bring out those details. That's me using artistic license. The light didn't actually fall there because I had a strong directional light from the other way, but I chose to say there's some bounce light, and so you're going to be able to see. Yeah, some reflected ground light. Yep. Yeah, so I just kind of brain that part. I just think about it. But yeah, with an airbrush you can do that, right? Because it's so versatile with the direction of the model. Especially if you don't mount the model on its base beforehand. You can do some really nice tricks with the underlight. Especially on monsters that are going to be like wet or shiny, like dragons or swampy things, where you'd see a little bit more underlit areas. That would work really well. Aaron's a pro. He knows how to do it. There we go. Do a little stretch and we'll be back. There we are. Okie dokie. Return. I think that's the best way to teach. It's where Jennifer and I used to do it. We'd hang out at our kitchen table and paint. That's why when Jen and I did our video for Dark Sword, that was what we channeled. It was like just hanging out at her kitchen table in Chicago like we used to do. Just hanging out and painting and chatting about painting. Like that's you can't make it intimidating. Like, I'm so against instructors who make it intimidating. I love people who deconstruct the mystery. Because there's so many people with a lot of fear about being artistic anyway. People who are convinced they could never be artistic or creative. And those are the people that need this hobby. Like, this hobby gives you the springboard. It gives you the canvas. It gives you the paint by number. Already done. And so then you can just step in and start, exploring your own creativity with these models. And it's invaluable, right? Because not all of us know how to sit down and just draw something and color it in. And so, but people like to be creative. People who never thought they were creative love stuff like this. And it fuels something, right? It gives you that everybody's a little bit creative. And we need that part of us to balance the stress of these days. So there's things I would change and things I would do differently now for it, but I think overall it went okay, that video. Like, I would do another one for Jim. But yeah, videos are less what people are looking for these days, because YouTube and Twitch have kind of made it obsolete to do, like, in production videos. Like, you just want a series that you can watch on your phone while you're doing other stuff. So it's a whole new world. Which reminds me, I need to do a couple of micro videos for YouTube coming up. We're going to start with real simple stuff, so it'll be stuff you guys have already seen for the most part. But I want to do, like I said, of just little 5-minute videos. Cute little 5-minute videos, and see if people like them. Just like micro picking apart the hobby of mini painting. Because, with the way I talk, it's going to be like one tiny topic in 5 minutes. And you want to know more? You have to watch the next one. I tend to like to micro break things down anyway, so should play to my strengths. But I noticed I had a lot of people, like a lot of followers on my YouTube, and I was like, oh, well, I should do more. Yeah, for the most part, prehistoric. Okay, so you can also do it the way that I do. If you don't, for the quickie thing, for a spray, like that, because that is what Zenithal generally is, right? Prehistoric. It's just spray can. That's the easy way to start to learn highlighting. But if you're willing to do a little bit more brain, you could start with a black primer and then get yourself a little, like the lights we gave out at ReaperCon, a little pen light. This guy. And then you could hit the huge bright light, and you could put it over the model and see where the highlights fell, and then paint that. Like, just put it down, paint what you saw, put it down, double check. You'd have to put it in the same position each time so you could see the light. But it's also, as you can see, a great double check, because you can look at it, and then when you move it away, can you still see those highlights and shadows, right? So something little like this, Not really shadow. Maybe? Yeah, my name is for 5 minutes, right? Yeah, I mean, you could get close to it. It's just imprecise. I mean, I think you'd have to touch it up a lot. And it depends on what you mean by dry brush. Like these days, people are doing, like the old thing for dry brush was just like grabbing your brush and going, wee, right? And if you're doing that, you're gonna probably get some paint where it shouldn't be. But then there's also the dry brush that people do now that's more like a side brush where they just gently kind of hit, the areas, and that leaves the black in the cracks. And so, that you could use that. Yeah. I mean, when you come down to it, guys, zenith highlighting, taking apart any mechanical application process, is the art of putting your highlights where light would fall on a model from above. And any way you can get that result in a way that's more or less true to the way the light falls, like, do it, right? The spray can and airbrush models are there because they're easy and fast. And if you have no idea how to think about light, they're a good starting point. I mean, dry brushing, I think, would tend to... You'd have to remember to always keep your dry brushing on the tops, essentially. And you'd probably have to do a lot of what I did here, bringing in detail, right? So I wish I had a Reaper model to show that on, but we haven't done Zenith for a while because I don't prime the Bones models. Maybe I'll do maybe for one of our coming up models, guys, we'll do a black base, and then I'll paint in the Zenith for you. Because, I mean, you just need to be able to look at what surfaces are pointed up, right? If your light is coming from above or near enough to it, you need to just be able to look at that. And everybody should be able to really say, does this surface point up or not, right? John David, I didn't even learn to dry brush until I already knew how to layer. I learned dry brushing just to, like, be able to say that I could do the technique. I dislike it. I only ever use it on terrain. I find that it's inferior in most respects, unless you're going for texture, which you are on terrain, or on weathering effects, like on tanks and armor, but I don't do tanks and armor, so... And frankly, if I need texture, like dirt or mud texture, I'm far more likely to stipple it than to dry brush it. I have control that way. I have a very precise painting style, though. You always gotta take these things with a grain of salt, and remember that my painting style isn't one that necessarily would benefit from dry brushing. Like, I don't mind taking more time and getting a more controlled effect. So, for me, it's just a downside. Chicken piccata, nice. Curry. Yeah, I made fish curry last night. David really likes this particular fish curry, so... Let's see. I think that on our dragon subject, it kind of goes down here. Kind of emulates the upper jaw. Now I'm using much thinner paint here on the face, which just is because I habitually thin my paint, probably. And here I think, I'm probably going to black in the mouth when I get to it. I'll just do red for now around it. Cod. There's a recipe. I have a recipe for a cod curry. That's really good. So we're just going over, and I'm going to double check this real quick. Let's see what our dragon looks like. Yeah, pretty much his upper jaw, although this dragon has more of a... The dragon we're painting has more of a upper jaw plate than this guy does. This guy has a big, thick lower jaw. But still, that's about where it comes together, so that's about where I'm going to do it. So coming down on this guy... So, all right, we'll get this all settled out. And then we have to decide if these are more scale plates or if they're going to be horns. I'm probably going to make them scale plates. Like these little guys here are horns, and you could paint them either way because they're in the right place. They're kind of leading off the horns. So if you need a color accent there or something, these side scales are a good place to put it. We'll see. I might make them purple. We'll find out. So why I'm doing this now, why I've switched from wet blending large areas to base coating small areas, is because we're going to have very little red on here. So I just kind of want to get this base down because the top layer scales are going to be black and maybe this side layer scales will go more purpley red. So because of that, I'm not going to, there's no space left to like wet blend this little strip in between. So I'll probably go to layering on that. And I need to block in the rest of it so I remember my color scheme. It is Wyvern Day. Hey, Pendrake. Oh, and I painted over that particular horn there, which I might do here too. Yeah. Yeah, because the thing is that I could make these like claws, right, or tusks, or spikes, right. But then the color, if I made them bony, would be the very similar color to the underside of the wyvern, and I don't want that. I want a contrasting color. So then going dark makes more sense, like going with the Kraken ink. Yeah, we got my paint a little bit thin here, so I may need to go and just drop a little bit more into it. And then we are going to do some big wet blends on the wings because we're getting close to the end of the stream. So I want to definitely get the wing stuff figured out just to try proof of concept. And then we can work it. The nice thing about a model like this is you have a lot of area to play around with. All right, so the head is more or less blocked in. I know where my horns are. I have to put my black stripe down the back, but I think I'm going to do wings and then maybe do black stripe. All right, so we're going to go to a bigger brush again, but I probably won't go to a monstrous flat like this. If this was a big dragon, I would absolutely use a brush like this, which is a size 4 Reaper flat. I would absolutely use a brush like this on wings, but these wings are smaller, and so I'm going to use my beat up mixing brush instead. It doesn't have a real tip anymore, but it has enough of a tip to get down into these cracks, whereas this thing definitely doesn't. So once again, I'm going for the biggest brush I can that can still do what I need it to do. I don't know about that one. I want the horns to stand out a little bit more, Pendrake, I think. And the problem with that is that then with your transition color, you get a lavender. And it looks, I don't know, I think that would just like kind of look weird. We'll see. I may decide I don't like the Kraken ink. I may go with the blue-black, the Nightmare Black instead. We'll see. We'll see. If it was a purplish gray, I think it would work better, but Kraken ink is so purple. So very purple. So really, if you're going to wet blend this sucker, you should do it section by section. Because as you recall, acrylic paint dries a lot faster. You won't have time. I'm just going to put a quick orange base coat over this whole thing. Then we're going to play with it. And don't be too persnickety. I mean, obviously, if you kind of paint over some of your scales accidentally, you're all right. Just go and touch it up. We're early days on this model, so you should expect to have touch-ups. This is a thin coat. You can see kind of a grayish color through it where the paint's still showing. I'm going to probably blend the reddish color out from the body here. I will probably put some purple shadows in to separate them, but I want the color to kind of look like it's bleeding in. I don't want this stark delineation. Yeah, in fact, I did, Grey Wolf. If you go back and look at Reaper, oh boy, Reaper Toolbox that I did 2 years ago, I painted Dance of Death. All of it. Almost all of it. And yeah, I use a big flat for the wings because they're flat. So there's no reason not to. If you're going to be blending them, use a flat. Or a big round. Either way. Use the biggest brush you can that lets you do what you need to do. And in the process of doing that, you may discover that you like the flat better or you like the round better. Like maybe you like the round better because you think the blending's a little better. Or that it lets you get into crevices. Or maybe you like the flat better because it just covers so much freaking ground and it's so fast. So there are definitely times where I reach for the flat. Though I tend to mostly use the flat on terrain because it's just so efficient. Although I like curved, like kind of filberty brushes for terrain as well. I like them both for different reasons, Julie. I think on a small model like this, the textured wing is nice because it gives you something to work with. If you're a new painter, you're probably going to pick up a small dragon before you pick up a big dragon. And so this is kind of nice for that. Like, the nice thing about the texture here is if you are a new painter, you could just base coat and put a nice wash on this, and all these patterns would show up really nicely. So, you know, then maybe you do a little highlight and it's going to look great. Whereas a big flat wing is a lot harder for a new painter to deal with. I think these wings are a nice combo of the two things because you can do a wash on them. But if you choose not to do that, as I will not be, you still have enough smooth area to do texture. So, and somewhat the sculpted texture is going to hide my brush strokes if because I'm going to do stripes. We're going to do stripes across the wing. And so this textured pattern is going to help to hide imperfections also, because when you're doing freehand over texture, it tends to help you like kind of blend things in a little bit more visually. This is about the same, it's very similar size, a little smaller than Pathfinder Red Dragon. So yeah, I think this is a kind of a good, I like the back here, Julie, where you've got some smooth area in the middle, but then more texture on the edges. So yeah, I think kind of a combo is nice. I think it does make sense for the wings to get a little more smooth where they're bulging out. So the smooth wings, you really have to like wet blend and texture and pattern all yourself. And so it can be nice to, I think, have a little texture, just a lead-in texture almost, that stimulates the brain to think of ideas for what to do with it. Like, the nice thing about a wing texture, if it's not like a total awful wing texture, and there are some awful wing textures out there, like just the lines, the streaky lines. Oh, it's terrible. But this organic texture, you know, it gives you ideas. You could do spots, you could do stripes. So if you're having trouble with your creativity, you could be like, well, I'll just try to work with what the sculptor did for me. I'm going to do this side, but then we'll wet blend the other side. I'm just waiting for all of this to dry. As you can see, it's still wet in the cracks. I'm being careful because I believe in the more careful you are with your base coats, the less time you have to spend touching up stuff later. So although you should expect touch-ups, being as neat as you can is a good strategy if you get frustrated with having to touch up. And it also, again, helps build brush control. All of this stuff where you make yourself be more precise. As long as you're not like contorting yourself to do it. Like, notice I just flipped the dragon around so that I could paint the wing in my normal comfortable brush position. I didn't even think about doing it. I just did it. And that's something you should be aware of in your own painting, is you should never like be contorting your brush in a weird way to try to get an area, it doesn't help you build brush control. Everything should be about building. The more control you build, the more, you're going to be pleased with your command of the control of the brush so that you can do fine details like eyeballs and buckles and things like that. Less frustration you will have down the road. And building brush control is something simple that everybody can do. And it happens automatically for the most part, but you can accelerate it if you're smart. Do these guys. This is where my brush kind of like fails on me because this little tiny little area here is not, I don't have enough of a tip on the brush. Oh, have fun, Nomad. Thanks for coming. Yeah. Yeah, that's a good point too. A lot of painters find it very hard to blend large areas. And I mean, that's why I say like on wings, do one membrane at a time, one section at a time. And work on your blending that way if you're doing it. I mean, there's some texture on there because skin texture, but yeah. I mean, they're wrinkly when they're folded, right? So these wrinkles that Julie has in here, technically these wings aren't fully extended because you don't have it out like that, right? So having some texture makes sense. But I mean, it's more like the texture is there more as a tool to help painters, I think. Because it's art versus reality, guys. Sculptors are making those decisions just like we will. So let's do some of this. I want a little bit of the mahogany in here, but I don't want much because I want these wings to be lighter and more orange. So I'll put in some of the mahogany. Now you could do a wash and bring out all this texture also. But I tend to like bringing out texture with highlights more than with shadows. And I'm just going to rough this in, probably. Just kind of see if I like it. While it's still wet, I can grab a little bit more of my orange brown and blend in this top part. And end up with a nice shadow there. Yes, you do overthink, Pendrake. Pendrake, you are the poster child for overthinking miniatures. But you know what? If it makes sense in your head, do it. Who cares? Like, if you decide that you want to portray a rougher surface and, like, well, then you can do scars, like I did on Dance of Death, right? Like, to suggest that the beastie has a tougher wing surface because it's fighting other beasties or, other threats in its environment. It's developed a rougher wing surface. But usually, roughness on wings is bad because it's results in drag, right? But if you've got a creature that isn't a real flyer or that depends on its magic to fly, then that no longer becomes a thing. Like, then you could argue that a rougher wing surface is fine if you don't need a smooth surface to fly. If you're not, like, if part of your innate magic is to fly, as is probably the case with dragons, because otherwise their wings would be so huge. There. So magical critters, as usual, kind of get the magic pass, but you can make up whatever story you like around your creatures. So that we got some nice blend going on there. So then, notice I'm blending the shadows and the highlights separately. So I haven't actually done a highlight. Let's do that. Let's make sure our fire orange is ready to go. And let's do a separate wet blend for our highlight. So it can be, I like to wet blend with 2 colors only. So, because otherwise I find you get muddiness. So, I do my shadow wet blend, and then I'm going to come back over the area that I left orange-brown in the first place. And I am using slightly thinned paint here. And then I'm grabbing my orange and seeing if that's gonna work out. I feel like I've got a little too much paint on my brush, and I probably put down a little bit of too thick paint at the beginning. But I can bring in the start of a highlight here. The orange is coming off a little bit weak, and I did take over a lot of the area with kind of this blend here. So that's where I might have to knock back. I might have to decide to knock back my my shadow color a little bit. To get more room for my top highlight. Or I may decide, because when you've got a color like this, and the reason that this happens is because the orange pigment, orange is a bit weak when you mix it. Like when you layer it, you always have to thin orange more than you think. It turns out to be stronger than you think as far as trying to blend it. But orange can be pretty weak off the cuff when you're mixing it with other colors. So it may not wet blend well, and in that case, what I'm headed for is layering. So if wet blending isn't gonna do quite what I want because my light orange is not a great blend color, then I'd come back and do more layering. But I'm gonna try it. Yeah, making it a little bit stronger helps. I'm just gonna kind of block it in. If I can't get a great blend off the bat, I still want to kind of proof of concept here. So I want to make sure that this orange looks good. Doing the highlights. It's only showing up a little bit brighter right now than the orange brown. Which is a testament to how orange the orange brown actually is. The other way to do this would be things I've talked about in other miniatures, right? I could actually underpaint some of these textured sections with white and put my fire orange over the top, and that would make it even brighter. Maybe we'll play with that next week. But I like my shadows right here. I like how the wing's looking right here. So now when we come to, let me grab my Da Vinci, or not my Da Vinci, my Raphael. When we come to like doing the blend here against a surface I've already kind of painted, and maybe I want some more control because I've got some fine folds here, I'm going to switch to a brush with a decent tip and use that. I'm going to block in some base color that's wet of my orange brown. I do want to make it a little thicker because I want it to stay wet for a tiny bit of time here. Now I'm going to grab my mahogany and kind of paint it into these folds. Kind of see that kind of suggests those wrinkles. Just to mark them kind of visually. And Julie has sculpted them going out like that. Then I'm going to come back in with my orange brown, and just like I did over here, I'm going to kind of fuzz out the edge of that orange brown to keep this fold texture suggested. So like getting it there. Need a little bit more mahogany. Wet blending is always a back and forth project for me. Do a little bit, go back a little bit, blend it in, introduce a little bit darker color. Come back in, knock that dark color out, but not quite as much as before. Got to work in small sections because everything needs to stay wet. If it's a very moist day where you are and you're in maybe a colder room, you have a little more time to work. The warmer and drier your environment is, the less time you have to work. Mostly it's humidity that will affect it. So then now I want some of this bright though. I feel I don't want to get too dark. So I may need to do kind of a slurry blend here. Bringing that orange in. And mostly I'm just going to keep asking myself, do I like it? Is it kind of doing the effect that I wanted? Is it giving me the ability to bring out these details? What about if I stipple a little bit? How's that? You know, does that work? Does it not work? Because you can stipple wet blend, of course. I do it a lot if you want to suggest texture. with these little folds, it can help to give a little bit of texture here. So that's blending in very nicely, actually. And I have to decide, I think I want some bright right up against the body here, but maybe I'll fade in a little bit of shadow back here. Sometimes when I'm doing a dab or a block, I'll do like that I just did. I did a very heavy reddish orange there. And then because it's such a big dab, it'll stay wet for just a little longer and give me more time to work it out and blend it in. And then you, with a tiny brush like this, you can side blend. You always never use this tip straight on. You don't want to wreck your tip, but you can do these tiny little wet blends quite easily with little amounts of paint on an area. Far more precise. The big thing is, as you start spreading out, make sure that you are blending in all your layers. Though you can certainly always use layering to correct it. I want to blend that back. And you can always take a damp brush and kind of blend in two different colors together. Don't want it wet, just want it a little damp. And then you can blend in that area. That's good. So those wings are pretty. I like that. It's very fiery. Our Wyvern is very fiery. So he's going to be quite pale on his underside. I'll probably leave the bottom sides of the wings a little darker because though there'll be light transmitting through them, I don't know. I have to ask myself how transparent the wings are at that point. Transmitted light can be a hard thing to convey on opaque models. By transmitted light, I'm talking about paint passing through a translucent surface that should be translucent, or light passing through, rather. So these wings should be somewhat translucent, like a bat's wings, when the light passes through them. But it can be a weird effect on a miniature because everything is in shadow. The light doesn't actually transmit, so then it becomes difficult. Then you sometimes have to go for a different effect. Alrighty, we are at about the right time to start looking for a Raid Reaper. What we did today is we blocked in the rest of our red scales. We talked a bit about placement. We talked a lot about zenith lighting. A lot about zenith lighting. We talked a little bit about frozen paint and why it happens. Talked about using oil paint on miniatures and even a little bit watercolor, why watercolor doesn't work on miniatures. Yeah, so we did all that. And then we talked a little bit about wet blending on big surfaces and little surfaces. So I hope you all had fun. And tomorrow is half orc. That'll be fun. Maybe we'll start on her dark red dress, or maybe we'll do something else. I haven't decided. I really love her skin tone, so I'm very happy with her so far. There we go. So there's our nice wet blended wing. It's coming along. It's coming along. We're going to add patterns. So we'll probably start to add patterns like after we block in this basic shadow highlight thing. Alrighty. Yeah, thanks for showing up, everybody. I really appreciate it when you all come out for the stream. Obviously, your input and heckling and you know, helping other people always makes the stream even better than it is otherwise. But yeah, so cool. Awesome. And I shot a video. Remember, I have a Patreon, patreon.com/paintingbig. I just shot a video for you guys yesterday, so I'm working on editing it now. Yeah, all it takes is a little bit. So who are we raiding today, Reaper? Who is our raid target? Who gets the benefit of our awesome people? We're getting though. Yeah, this is an interesting. It's a very fiery Wyvern. Very fiery. We'll put some patterns on the wings. It'll break up that orange a bit. And I still have to do a bit of shading and putting in purple and blue and black. That's going to change how the model looks for sure. John must be searching. John or Justin. Either Justin has been distracted or John is searching. I know John is out there somewhere. Oh yeah, that's right. Miniatures done with Lucas this afternoon, guys. Oh, Flickster. I love Flickster. He's so much fun. Oh, yay. Yay. Flickster's a treat, guys. He's a cool guy. You should totally watch him for a little while. All right? Okay, everybody. I will see you here tomorrow for Half Orc Thursday. All righty. Have a fantastic day, everybody. Bye-bye.